A new year, 2025, has just arrived, and in its very first minute, Israel got poked in the eye. The Hamas terrorist organization fired towards the Israeli communities surrounding the Gaza Strip at the stroke of midnight as the new year began, providing fireworks, but not the kind that we want. But it was a bitter new year for Hamas as well, as the IDF and the Shin Bet eliminated the commander of a Nukhba platoon who led the massacre in Nir Oz on October 7, 2023. And meanwhile, we seem to have reached an impasse in negotiations over a hostage release deal, prompting the IDF to intensify military pressure on Hamas in the northern Gaza Strip in an attempt to move negotiations forward. But while the IDF has achieved some operational successes in the north of the Gaza Strip, according to American intelligence, Hamas has recruited thousands of new fighters and is rebuilding its capabilities. And meanwhile, the IDF has published new details about the activity at the Kamal Adwan hospital in Bet Lahia in northern Gaza. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will give us some analysis of what's keeping the Ayatollah regime in Iran up at night these days, and why, in order to defeat the Houthis, one needs to do the most Israeli thing. Meanwhile, on the Lebanese border, the fragile ceasefire is holding, but there have been incidents. Over the last 24 hours, another incident occurred when Hezbollah operatives attempted to transfer weapons and were hit by an Israeli airstrike. A senior Hezbollah official is threatening that if the IDF does not withdraw, it will respond severely. And elsewhere, the negotiations for the release of our hostages held in Gaza by Hamas appear to have reached an impasse, as Hamas is complicating matters and currently refuses to release hostages. Instead, Hamas is offering a one-week ceasefire that will not include the release of hostages, and during its fourth day, they will provide a list of the hostages they are capable of releasing. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what's happening in Israel on day 453 in the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and all the Shiite militias in Syria and Iraq. All of them are acting under the directives of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we begin, I want to invite you to please click on the subscribe button if you haven't already, so that you'll never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground and stay updated with the truth from Israel. As the year 2024 departed away at midnight from the civil calendar, 2025 arrived in its place. The past year has been especially tumultuous, with continued warfare in the Gaza Strip and Lebanon, a direct confrontation with the Islamic Republic of Iran, the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria, efforts to contain outbreaks of intense fighting in Judea and Samaria, and preventing Iran from establishing a foothold in Jordan. Throughout 2024, there was no diplomatic breakthrough to bring Israeli hostages home from captivity in the Gaza Strip. But in heroic operations, the IDF and the Shin Bet succeeded in rescuing several hostages alive, as well as retrieving the bodies of some who had been murdered in captivity. On Tuesday, the final day of 2024, the Israeli Air Force carried out a strike that resulted in the elimination of terrorist Abd al-Hadi Sabah, the commander of a Nukhba platoon in the Western Khan Yunis battalion of Hamas. This evil man operated from within the humanitarian zone in Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip, but before that, he was one of the leaders of the raid on the Israeli kibbutz Nir Oz in the brutal October 7th massacre against Israelis. During the war, he also organized and led many terror plots against our forces. The IDF stated, prior to the strike, numerous steps were taken to minimize the risk to civilians, including munition selection, intelligence gathering, and aerial reconnaissance. the IDF and the Shin Bet will continue to act forcefully against all terrorists who took part in the murderous October 7th massacre. Amidst these successes, the pursuit of terrorists in the Gaza Strip continues, and on Saturday, the 401st Armored Brigade, along with the fighters of the Nahal, Givati, the Combat Engineering Corps, and Shayetet 13, managed to close in on Hamas's last stronghold in Jabalia, the Kamal Adwan hospital, where hundreds of terrorists were hiding. And during the operation, the IDF eliminated 19 terrorists in exchanges of fire and managed to arrest another 240 terrorists, including 15 who are known to have taken part in the atrocities of October 7 against Israelis. Many of them committed acts of murder and other severe crimes. Under the cover of the rain and stormy weather in the region, hundreds of terrorists who remained in northern Gaza and Jabalia tried to flee further south. But when they began to move out in the open, the IDF was able to see them and confront them. Some surrendered when the IDF soldiers called to them, but many others decided to go down fighting and were eliminated in exchanges of fire. Despite these battlefield successes that offer hope for an end to the fighting, celebrations for the new civil year started in Israel on a sore note, as sirens went off in the Gaza Envelope communities last night precisely at midnight. The IDF spokesperson's unit announced that 2 launches from the central Gaza Strip were detected, one of which was successfully intercepted, while the other fell in open terrain. Shortly after the rockets were fired, the IDF spokesperson's unit in Arabic, Colonel Avichai Aderi, published on his X account an evacuation notice for the residents of El Burij. To the residents of the Gaza Strip, the El Burij area, this is an early warning. Terrorist organizations are launching rockets from this area that has already been warned multiple times in the past. For your safety, move immediately to the humanitarian area. Amidst these operational activities and in light of the deadlock in negotiations for a hostage deal, Israel's political echelon is considering soon to ordering the IDF to seize the city of Gaza in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, as we previously reported on Tuesday evening. In Jerusalem, there is considerable satisfaction over the successes of the fairly aggressive operation that the IDF has been conducting in the past few weeks in northern Gaza. It's not only the operational achievement of taking hundreds of terrorist fighters off the battlefield, including many who were captured and provided valuable intelligence. It also includes the pressure that this ground operation is imposing on the murderous Hamas terrorist organization, which fears permanently losing a significant part of the Gaza Strip's territory. Given this understanding and the deadlock in negotiations, the political leadership is considering directing the IDF to head southward and take operational control over Gaza City in the near future. Such an action is more feasible now that there is a ceasefire in Lebanon, freeing up more forces for a sustained, extensive ground operation in Gaza. No final decisions have been made yet, and the Security Cabinet meeting scheduled for Thursday was postponed due to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's hospitalization. But in Israel, there is a growing realization that the only thing that truly hurts Hamas is the loss of territory. And so, it wouldn't be surprising if we soon see the IDF conquering Gaza City, likely also evacuating its residents. Some might say that after 15 months of fighting in such a small geographical space, it is strange to still be talking about taking control of one city. But we must remember that Israel, the IDF, and the security establishment have never fought such a long war with so many fronts. It's doubtful any army in the world has faced such a test since the end of World War II. In this context, the steps Israel is taking aim to eradicate once and for all the evil of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and can be seen as a very complicated problem that has no quick or easy solution. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on what's happening in the Gaza Strip. A second before we go to our senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani to understand the situation with the Houthis and Iran, I want to invite you to visit our website at tbnisrael.com for another source of regular news updates. At our news site, we bring you up-to-date and detailed content on what's happening in Israel. So go to tbnisrael.com, stay aligned with the truth. While you're at the website, you can also make a donation to help us continue bringing you these updates and expanding our coverage of events here in Israel and the Middle East, so that you will know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We are now witnessing an emerging front that could affect every one of us here in Israel. Over the past days, we've seen repeated missile and drone attacks by the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen, including a ballistic missile fire at Israel just last night. Although that missile was intercepted before it even reached our territorial airspace, it triggered air raid sirens across central Israel, sending hundreds of thousands of people to their bomb shelters. And meanwhile, American and British forces struck hard at Houthi installations in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a, destroying weapons facilities, command centers, and more. This escalation is part of a broader crisis stretching from Yemen's civil war to the corridors of power in Tehran, Iran. To help us unpack the story, we turn to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani. Mati, what's your take on all this, the Houthi threat, the American and British strikes, and Iran's role behind the scenes?
Thank you, Yael. The conflict we're seeing in Yemen is in many ways just another extension of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's regional ambitions. The Houthi rebels, also known as Ansar Allah, as their previous name indicates, are openly backed, funded, and supplied by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran. For years, Iran has used the Houthis to harass Saudi Arabia via missile strikes, drone attacks, and maritime threats in the Red Sea. But as you mentioned, in recent weeks, these Houthis have turned their attention to us here in Israel. They've been firing ballistic missiles, sending drones in our direction, and some have even reached into the Israeli airspace. Now, though these attempts have so far been intercepted, their intentions are crystal clear. Every single ballistic missile or drone they fire is meant to send a message, not only on behalf of the Houthis themselves, of course, but also from their masters in Tehran. It is a statement that says, we can reach you from 2,000 kilometers away, or 1,300 miles. So far, these attacks have been a nuisance and not a major military threat. We can shoot them down, but the Houthis have proven determined to keep firing. They don't need to win in a conventional sense. Just surviving, harassing, and of course destabilizing is enough to serve the Iranian agenda. Now, the other side of this coin is what's happening on the ground in Yemen. The US, Britain, and other members of the international coalition are all together suddenly very proactive in striking Houthi positions, including advanced weapon depots, missile assembly sites, and many more locations. By doing so, they're attempting to cripple the Houthis' capacity to continue threatening our peace in this region. At the same time, we see attempts by Saudi Arabia and the UAE to back various militias opposed to the Houthi rebels. Recent reporting suggests new training programs and alliances are forming as we speak to contain or topple the Houthis. You can imagine a scenario in which local Yemeni groups, aided by Gulf partners, mount a ground offensive against the Houthi rebels. If that happens, Iran's gambit in Yemen would be in serious jeopardy. But for us in Israel, the direct question remains, what do we do about it? We can continue relying on our own missile defense, like Iron Dome and David Sling, expensive and complicated systems, to intercept inbound threats from Yemen. And indeed, we've done exactly that successfully so far. But every time that a siren sounds, tens of thousands of people are racing to their shelters. Women, children, the elderly. We all know that strategically, we'd much prefer to strike at the source of the problem. This all leads us straight to Tehran, because frankly, the Houthis are just one node in the broader Iranian network. Now, over the last few months, Iran has taken severe hits across this region. Their Syrian ally and a main investment for them, Bashar al-Assad, is finally gone, leaving Syria in utter chaos and causing serious damage to the Iranian logistics. Hezbollah, their other major proxy in the region, is under tremendous pressure on Israel's northern border, and now is forced to accept a ceasefire they very much don't want to partake in. Even Hamas is reeling under military blows again and again, and Iranian overreach. So Iran is highly motivated to score some kind of propaganda victory, and the Houthis might just be the way for them to progress with that. They might be their best chance to project power at this time. But the Houthis are also making themselves targets. American and British fighter jets have continuously and repeatedly hammered Houthi positions across the region, and specifically in the capital of Sana'a, hitting crucial command centers, ballistic missile caches, and drone manufacturing facilities. This was all in retaliation, not just for the attacks on the State of Israel, but also for the repeated strikes on coalition ships and commercial vessels transporting goods across the Red Sea. And finally, there's an economic dimension. Yemen sits on a strategic crossroads for global shipping, especially in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Straits. If the Houthis can disrupt shipping, it doesn't only threaten Israel, it also threatens the Saudis themselves, the Egyptians, and even the global trade. And that is a line the US and Europe simply aren't prepared to let the Houthis cross. So let's sum all of this up. The Houthis are a real nuisance, armed by Iran, determined to remain relevant despite suffering repeated military setbacks. And meanwhile, Israel remains on high alert, intercepting missiles, but also weighing how to neutralize the threat at its source. The US and Britain have already stepped up by striking the Houthis from the air, and we might just see a deeper involvement from them and from other regional powers like the Saudis in the days and weeks to come. But finally, Iran, the ultimate puppet master, is growing weaker on multiple fronts. They've lost power in Syria, they've lost assets and power in Lebanon, in Gaza, and seized the Houthis, of course as the Iranians, as the means to pressure and distract Israel after their loss of power in other areas of this region. So where does this leave us? We must stay vigilant. We may see continued sporadic launches by the Houthis, especially if they think they can embarrass us or force us into focusing too heavily on Yemen. If the Houthis keep up these provocations, there's a real possibility that Israel, perhaps aided by the US, will take more decisive action to degrade their capabilities. And in the meantime, any blow we land on the Houthis is also a blow to Iran. This is key. We're not just dealing with a local Yemeni rebellion. We're dealing with one more tentacle of the Iranian octopus. And by weakening the Houthis, we weaken Iran's entire chain of influence throughout the region. So Yael, that's where things stand now. An unpredictable front that could either fade if the Houthis are sufficiently punished, or possibly escalate into a protracted exchange of missile fire. We'll have to see how Tehran and Washington maneuver this complex situation.
Thank you, Mati, for that thorough breakdown of a conflict that often seems distant but clearly has real impact on Israel's security and the entire region's stability. We're living in momentous days. Bashar al-Assad's fall in Syria, the ongoing weakness of Hezbollah, a battered Hamas, and now these Iranian-backed Houthis who keep challenging us from more than 2,000 kilometers away. The question is, how far will Tehran push their luck, and how will Israel and its allies respond? If you want to receive daily news updates from Israel, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, TBN Israel, and stay tuned for boots on the ground and never miss an update. You can also help us by sharing our videos and follow us on social media. Before we conclude this report, I must shift our focus to events in Lebanon, where the Iranian-backed terrorist organization Hezbollah continues to violate the ceasefire at the same time as it makes increasingly strong demands that Israel adhere to it. On Tuesday, Hezbollah fighters were observed attempting to pick up some weapons and ammunition from a hidden cache in southern Lebanon and load it on to a vehicle. Instead, the IDF quickly launched a strike to destroy both the vehicle along with the weapons and the ammunition. Winter has arrived in southern Lebanon, and there have been heavy rain showers all over the area and even snow in some places over the past few days. But even so, the IDF has continued with the mission of locating and exposing terrorist infrastructure throughout the town of Nakura in southern Lebanon, opposite the beautiful and rocky Mediterranean Sea coast. They are operating on the ridge above the coastline, not far from the Israeli Rosh Hanikra and Kibbutz Manara, adjacent to the main headquarters of the United Nations UNIFIL force in southern Lebanon. This coming weekend, we will post a field report from Kibbutz Manara on our TBN Israel YouTube channel, so you can see firsthand what is happening in Israel's northern communities and the work we'll need to do to repair the damage from this war and rebuild our towns. Be sure to stay tuned for this report. And getting back to Nakura in Lebanon, after the start of the ceasefire with Hezbollah a little more than a month ago, the IDF wants to ensure that the war won't simply pause without properly dealing with that village. It is a strategically located village in one of the most sensitive areas along the border with Lebanon and Israel, and Hezbollah has used it as a strategic and logistical hub for its operations along the main coastal route leading to major cities like Tyre and Sidon. This logistical hub is a key part of Hezbollah's plans to invade northern Israel and conquer the Galilee. And another detail that's important to remember is that this major center of Hezbollah's activity is located within sight of a base of the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, or UNIFIL. This UN peacekeeper force is supposed to be monitoring the area to ensure that there are no military forces other than the Lebanese National Army operating there, but Hezbollah has never had any trouble working around that location. The IDF has captured enormous quantities of weapons, ammunition, and military equipment that Hezbollah stored in Nakura and in dozens of other villages in southern Lebanon. It is difficult to believe that these UNIFIL peacekeeping force were not aware of what Hezbollah was doing, and obviously they did nothing to interfere. They didn't lift a finger to stop it. It's quite clear that the United Nations forces cooperated silently, given the extent of the weapons that were found in that location. Forces from the 226th Brigade Combat Team, commanded by Division 146, found many weapons in residents' homes and yards in the village of Nakura. They even found weapons stored in the village's pharmacy. One officer observed that in another world, this village could be like any tourist village in Greece or in the islands of Cyprus. It's so surreal. We must remember that after this war is done, we're up against an enemy that exploits this reality to try and harm us. If you want to receive daily news updates from Israel, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, TBN Israel, and stay tuned to Boots on the Ground and never miss another update. You can also help us by sharing our videos and following us on social media. Regarding the hostage deal, we once again seem to be at an impasse in negotiations, but behind the scenes, intensive contacts are ongoing to advance a deal. The central dispute continues to hold back the progress is that Israel is demanding that Hamas present a detailed list of the hostages designated to be released, a demand which the terrorist organization Hamas persistently refuses. And meanwhile, United States President-elect Donald Trump once again threatened Hamas on Tuesday evening. In remarks to reporters at his New Year's Eve gala, Trump responded to a question about the negotiations by saying, "Let me put it this way, Hamas better let the hostages come back soon." In response to the question about a ceasefire, he simply said, "We'll see what happens." Elsewhere, diplomats from Arab states told the Wall Street Journal that talks in recent days had reached a dead end. The report said that Hamas recently renewed its demands that Israel commit to ending the fighting after there had already been some flexibility on its part regarding that issue. According to the Wall Street Journal, this makes the possibility of a deal being reached before Trump's inauguration in January 20th unlikely. In parallel to the negotiations, the IDF is significantly increasing military pressure in the Gaza Strip. Additional forces are already being deployed, and military activity is expected to expand considerably going forward. Security officials believe that stepping up military pressure could magnify the pressure on Hamas and perhaps even advance the possibility of a deal. According to foreign sources, Hamas is not making a ceasefire contingent on the withdrawal of IDF forces from the Gaza Strip or returning displaced Gazan residents to their homes. According to these sources, Israel will decide at the end of the 7th day of the ceasefire whether or not it agrees to the list of hostages Hamas will provide. If it doesn't agree, the IDF will return to fighting. However, the main stumbling block in the talks is a question over whether Hamas will remain in political and physical control in the Gaza Strip. It was also reported that according to sources, Hamas knows where most of the hostages are being held but wants to buy more time. The difficulties currently blocking the implementation of the deal revolve around the number of hostages to be released and whether or not they're classified as humanitarian cases. Again, sources in Gaza claim there is just one man complicating the hostage deal and blocking progress in talks, and that is Muhammad Sinwar, the brother of late Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. He's currently leading what's left of Hamas, and he has shown that he's willing to play the hostage card, the only real advantage he has left, without mercy. That means that you and I must pray without ceasing for these hostages. And I would like to make it personal for you. I would like to introduce you to one hostage. Agam Berger, 20 years of age, had just begun her army service when she was taken hostage into Gaza from the Nir Oz military base. A few months ago, her family found her diary, seemingly foreshadowing her fate. In her diary she wrote, "Do not confine me in any cage, neither physical or spiritual." Alongside her handwritten note, Agam added, "God will accompany me in every step." On October 7th, Agam was seen being led to her car, kidnapped in her pajamas. A video of her abduction was published by Hamas, showing the terrorists shouting at her and her friends. Agam is seen in the video with a bleeding face. Please, remember that this is a spiritual war. And how do we fight a spiritual war? We pray. So please continue praying with us for the IDF soldiers, wherever they are, at the sea, in the land, or in the air. Pray for the peace of Israel, and most importantly, don't forget to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And together, we will win this war because God is on our side.